A single tablespoon can quietly change the way your body deals with sugar, energy, and even hormones, yet almost no one treats it like it matters. And that's where things get interesting. Because what looks small on the surface can trigger a chain reaction inside your body that most people never notice until it's already working against them. And this is exactly why so many people struggle with low energy, stubborn belly fat, constant cravings, and that slow drop in strength and drive that feels like it came out of nowhere, even when they think they're doing everything right, eating less, trying to stay active, cutting sugar here and there, but still not seeing real change. And the missing piece is not always another strict diet or a complicated plan. It's often a simple signal your body has been waiting for, something so basic that it rarely gets attention in typical health advice because it doesn't sound powerful enough to make a difference. Yet it directly affects insulin, which is one of the most important hormones, controlling whether your body stores fat or burns it, whether your energy stays stable or crashes, and whether your internal environment supports healthy testosterone levels or slowly suppresses them over time. And here's where the quiet truth starts to unfold. When insulin stays high again and again, even from normal meals, your body shifts into storage mode. It holds on to fat, it blocks efficient energy use, and it creates the kind of internal stress that pushes testosterone down without you even realizing it. So, the real problem is not always what you eat, but how your body responds to what you eat. And that response can be influenced by small habits that seem almost too simple to take seriously. Yet they change the timing, the speed, and the impact of how nutrients enter your system. And that is where this 1 tablespoon comes in. Not as a miracle, not as hype, but as a practical tool that works with your biology instead of against it. And the reason this isn't widely talked about is not because it's hidden, but because it doesn't fit the usual approach that focuses on bigger, louder solutions. While this one works quietly in the background, improving how your body handles blood sugar, reducing unnecessary spikes, and creating a more stable environment where hormones can function the way they're supposed to. And once that stability starts to build, changes begin to show up in ways people often don't connect at first. Better energy across the day, fewer sudden crashes, less urge to snack on quick sugar fixes, and over time, a shift in how your body manages fat and supports strength. And that's the part that catches attention because when insulin is no longer constantly elevated, testosterone doesn't face the same resistance. It doesn't get pushed down as easily, and your body starts moving back toward balance instead of staying stuck in a cycle of storage and fatigue. And in this video, everything will be broken down in a clear and simple way, starting with what this 1 tablespoon actually is, why its timing matters more than people think, how it interacts with your body right after you consume it, and what changes you can realistically expect when it becomes part of your routine, along with the common mistakes that reduce its effect and how to avoid them so you're not wasting time or effort. And the goal here is not to overwhelm you with complex science, but to show you how a small, consistent action can influence bigger systems inside your body in a way that finally makes sense. So by the end, you'll understand not just what to do, but why it works and why such a simple habit can quietly outperform more extreme approaches that are hard to maintain. And this is exactly why staying until the end matters, because the real value is not just in knowing the ingredient, but in understanding how to use it correctly so it actually works for you instead of becoming another forgotten tip. So if you're ready to learn how a single tablespoon can shift the way your body handles insulin and supports healthier testosterone levels without adding complexity to your life, then you're in the right place. Welcome to the channel, where simple health truths are explained in a way that actually makes sense. And if you want more content like this that helps you work with your body instead of against it, make sure to subscribe and stay connected for what's coming next. Energy drops at the wrong time of the day start to feel normal after a while, but they are not normal. That heavy feeling after meals, the slow thinking, the need for something sweet just to feel steady again, it builds quietly. And at the same time, the waistline begins to change in a way that does not match how much effort is being put into eating better or moving more. And this is where frustration grows because the usual advice says eat less, move more, be consistent, yet the results stay slow or completely stuck. And cravings begin to control decisions more than hunger does, especially in the late afternoon or late at night when energy crashes harder. And this is also where another layer starts to show up: lower drive, less strength, slower recovery, less motivation to do things that once felt easy. And many people assume this is just part of getting older or part of a busy life. But that explanation does not fully connect the dots, because these changes often happen even when someone is trying to stay healthy. And the real link hiding underneath all of this is how the body is handling insulin throughout the day, not just once, but repeatedly after every meal and snack. Because insulin is not just about sugar, it is a signal, a powerful one. It tells the body what to do with the energy coming in. And when that signal is constantly high or constantly spiking, the body shifts into a pattern that favors storage over use. And that is when fat starts to stay instead of being burned, energy starts to dip instead of staying stable, and hormones like testosterone begin to face resistance instead of support. And this pattern can build even from foods that seem normal, because it is not only about what is eaten, it is about how fast it enters the bloodstream and how sharply insulin responds. And once that cycle repeats enough times, it becomes the default setting, and people begin to live inside that pattern without realizing it, waking up already low on energy, depending on quick fixes to feel normal, and slowly losing the natural balance that the body is designed to maintain. And the key point here is simple but often missed. When insulin is high, your body stores fat, kills energy, and suppresses testosterone, not as a rare event, but as a repeated daily response. And understanding this changes how the problem is viewed, because it is no longer about blaming willpower or discipline. It becomes about changing the signals that are being sent to the body over and over again. And this is where a shift begins to make sense. Not a drastic change, not an extreme plan, but a small, consistent action that adjusts the way the body responds to food, because the body is always listening, always reacting, and even small inputs can lead to different outputs when they are timed correctly and repeated daily. And this idea moves away from the pressure of doing everything perfectly and instead focuses on doing one thing that actually influences the system in a meaningful way. And this is where simple habits start to show their real power, not because they are exciting, but because they are repeatable and aligned with how the body works. And when a habit is placed right before a meal, it has a direct effect on what happens next, on how quickly sugar enters the bloodstream, on how high insulin rises, and on how the body decides to use or store that energy. And this is why timing matters as much as the habit itself, because the body reacts differently depending on what comes first. And once this is understood, the idea of a small change before meals becomes more than just a tip. It becomes a strategy, something that can quietly shift the entire response without needing to change everything else at once. And this is where the focus moves to something very simple: a single tablespoon, something that can be added without disrupting daily life, something that does not require strict planning or complicated steps, and yet it interacts with the body at the exact moment where it matters most, right before food begins to break down and enter the system. And the ingredient itself is not new. It has been around for a long time, often used without much attention to its deeper effects. And that ingredient is apple cider vinegar, taken in a small amount, usually diluted, before meals. And what it does is not dramatic on the surface, but inside the body, it begins to slow down how quickly carbohydrates are broken down into sugar, which means the rise in blood sugar becomes more controlled, less sharp, less overwhelming, and as a result, insulin does not need to spike as high to manage that sugar. And this one change in response starts to ripple through other systems, because when insulin stays more stable, the body is not pushed into constant storage mode. It becomes easier to use energy instead of storing it. And that steady use of energy translates into more consistent energy levels across the day, fewer crashes, fewer urgent cravings, and a clearer sense of hunger instead of random urges. And over time, this also creates a better internal environment for hormones, because testosterone is sensitive to metabolic stress, and high, repeated insulin spikes contribute to that stress. So, when those spikes are reduced, even slightly but consistently, the pressure on hormonal balance begins to ease. And this is not about instant changes or extreme results. It is about creating conditions where the body can function more efficiently, and that efficiency builds quietly day after day without needing constant effort or attention. And the simplicity of it is what makes it easy to overlook because it does not feel powerful enough. But the body does not always respond to intensity, it responds to signals. And when the signal is steady and repeated, it becomes stronger over time. And this is why something as small as a tablespoon before meals can have an effect that feels bigger than expected. Not because it is doing everything on its own, but because it is adjusting how the body handles what is already happening. And that adjustment is often the missing link between effort and results, the part that turns the same routine into a different outcome. And once that link is in place, the same meals can feel different, the same day can feel more stable, and the same body can begin to respond in a new way, not forced, not extreme, just guided in the right direction through a simple, repeatable action that fits into everyday life without resistance or complexity. What happens next inside the body is quiet but very important, because this small step before meals begins to change how your system reacts from the very first bite, and the first effect shows up in how blood sugar rises after eating. Because when food enters the body, especially meals with carbohydrates, it breaks down into glucose, and that glucose moves into the bloodstream. And when it rises too fast, the body reacts quickly by releasing a large amount of insulin to control it. And that fast rise, followed by a strong response, is what creates the spike and crash cycle that so many people feel without knowing the cause. The quick energy, followed by the sudden drop, the need for something sweet, the feeling of being tired even after eating. And this is where that tablespoon begins to slow things down, not by blocking food, not by stopping digestion, but by gently reducing the speed at which sugar enters the bloodstream. And when that rise becomes slower and more controlled, the body does not need to release as much insulin all at once. And that single adjustment changes the entire pattern, because instead of a sharp spike and a sharp crash, the curve becomes smoother, more stable, easier for the body to manage. And this directly affects how energy feels, because stable blood sugar means steady energy, fewer sudden drops, fewer urgent cravings, and a better sense of control throughout the day. And it also affects fat storage, because when insulin spikes are lower, the body is less likely to switch into storage mode, which means less of that incoming energy gets pushed into fat cells, and more of it can be used or burned. And over time, this creates a noticeable difference, not from one meal, but from repeated meals handled in a more balanced way. And that is the first layer of how it works. Simple, steady control instead of sharp reactions. And once that pattern begins to shift, the second effect starts to build. And that is how the body responds to insulin itself. Because insulin sensitivity is about how effectively your cells react to insulin's signal. And when the body is exposed to high insulin levels again and again, it begins to respond less efficiently, almost like the signal is being ignored or delayed, and that forces the body to release even more insulin to get the same job done, creating a cycle that becomes harder to break. And this is where small, repeated reductions in insulin spikes begin to help, because when the body is not constantly flooded with high levels, it can start to regain responsiveness. And that means the same amount of insulin can do its job more effectively, moving glucose into cells without needing excessive amounts. And this improved response leads to better energy use, because glucose is being handled properly instead of lingering in the bloodstream. And it also reduces the stress placed on the system, because the body is no longer working overtime to manage repeated spikes. And this is not an instant switch, it is a gradual improvement that builds with consistency. But it is powerful because it changes the way the body reacts at a basic level, making everything that follows more efficient. And when this efficiency improves, daily life starts to feel different. energy becomes more reliable, hunger signals become clearer, and the constant push toward quick sugar fixes begins to fade. And then the third effect begins to connect, and that is where hormones come into play, especially testosterone, because hormone balance is closely linked to metabolic health. And when insulin is high for long periods, it creates an environment that does not support optimal hormone function. And this is not always obvious at first, but it shows up in subtle ways: lower drive, slower recovery, reduced strength, and a general feeling that something is off. And when insulin levels are brought down and stabilized, even slightly but consistently, that pressure begins to ease, and the body has more space to maintain balance. And this is why lowering insulin indirectly supports testosterone, not by forcing it higher, but by removing one of the factors that holds it back. And this leads to a simple but powerful idea. When insulin comes down, testosterone does not have to fight anymore. It can function in a more natural way. And this connection explains why improving one system often leads to improvements in another, because the body works as a whole, not in isolated parts. And once this is understood, the impact of small habits becomes clearer because they are not acting alone. They are influencing a chain of responses that build over time, and this brings attention to why something so simple is not widely discussed in everyday conversations about health. And the reason is not hidden, it is more about how the system is structured, because most standard approaches focus on clear, measurable treatments, often involving medication or structured plans that are designed to address specific conditions. And within that framework, small daily habits can seem too minor to focus on, even if they have a meaningful effect over time. And another reason is that simplicity is often overlooked because it does not stand out, it does not feel advanced or complex, and it does not promise fast, dramatic results. So it gets less attention, even though it fits easily into daily life and can be maintained without stress. And there is also a tendency to separate nutrition, hormones, and metabolism into different areas, even though they are deeply connected. So a small step that influences all three at once may not fit neatly into one category. And as a result, it stays in the background instead of becoming a central recommendation. And this does not mean it is unimportant. It simply means it does not match the usual way solutions are presented. And this is why understanding and applying it personally becomes valuable, because it allows you to use a simple tool that works with your body without needing to depend on complex systems. And once the idea is clear, the next step becomes straightforward, because using it does not require complicated rules or strict timing. It is built around consistency and ease, and the basic approach is simple: 1 tablespoon taken before meals, usually mixed with water to make it easier to consume and gentler on the system. And the timing matters because it places the effect right before food begins to break down, which is when it can influence how sugar enters the bloodstream. And keeping it diluted helps avoid irritation and makes it easier to turn into a daily habit. And the focus is not on taking more, but on taking the right amount at the right time, because more does not mean better in this case. And consistency is what allows the effects to build day after day, meal after meal, creating a pattern that the body begins to recognize and respond to. And this is where patience becomes important, because the goal is not to force immediate change, but to guide the body toward a more stable response over time. And while the step itself is simple, there are common mistakes that can reduce its effectiveness. And one of the most common is taking too much, assuming that a larger amount will lead to faster or stronger results. But this often leads to discomfort without improving the outcome, because the body responds best to steady, moderate input rather than excess. And another mistake is expecting instant results, looking for a dramatic change after 1 or 2 uses. And when that does not happen, the habit is dropped before it has time to work, even though its real strength comes from repetition, not from a single critical moment. And there is also the tendency to rely on this one step while ignoring other parts of lifestyle, such as overall diet, sleep, and activity. And while this habit can support the system, it works best when it is part of a balanced approach, not a replacement for everything else. And understanding these points helps keep expectations realistic and the process effective, because the goal is not perfection, it is progress, built through small, consistent actions that align with how the body naturally works, allowing each day to build on the last without adding pressure or complexity. In the end, this was never about doing more, adding more rules, or pushing your body harder every single day. It comes down to something much simpler and much smarter, sending the right signal at the right time, because your body is always listening, always reacting. And when that signal finally makes sense, everything begins to shift in a way that feels natural instead of forced. And that is the real difference. When your body feels safe and balanced, it stops holding on, it stops storing excess fat, it stops crashing your energy, and it starts working with you instead of against you. And that is when real change begins, not from pressure, but from alignment, not from extremes, but from consistency. And once you understand this, small actions no longer feel small. They become powerful tools that guide your body back to where it is supposed to be. So if this opened your eyes even a little, make sure you don't miss what's coming next. Like this video so more people can learn these simple truths. Subscribe to the channel for more clear and practical health insights that actually make sense, and share this with someone who is tired of low energy, stubborn fat, or feeling out of balance, because sometimes the smallest shift is exactly what changes everything.